America needs a full-time president and a full-time Congress, particularly at this time with problems we face at home and abroad, to continue to fight through the months ahead for my personal vindication would almost totally absorb the time and attention of both the President and the Congress in a period when our entire focus should be on the great issues of peace abroad and prosperity without inflation at home. Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
In order to accurately tell the story of the 1976 Republican National Convention and the rise of Ronald Reagan, it's vital to properly arrange the players on the field. 1976 was a culmination of events that began with Watergate, and as you saw, the end of Richard Nixon's time as President of the United States. In stepped a gracious and humble Gerald Ford, having the unique distinction of being the first to serve as both Vice President and President without election. Ford took over as Vice President in late 1973, following the resignation of Spiro Agnew. Agnew would later enter a plea of no contest to criminal charges on both tax evasion and money laundering. Ford was sworn in as President of the United States on August 9, 1974. Roughly 10 days later, he would nominate Nelson Rockefeller, the former governor of New York, to be his Vice President.
I am acutely aware that you have not elected me as your president by your ballots. So I ask you to confirm me as your president with your prayers. And I hope that such prayers will also be the first of many. If you have not chosen me by secret ballot, neither have I gained office by any secret promises. I have not campaigned either for the presidency or the vice presidency. I have not subscribed to any partisan platform. I am indebted to no man, and only to one woman, my dear wife.
1 month later, President Ford granted a full and unconditional pardon to Richard Nixon. This caused his approval rating to drop from 69% to 49% in just 1 week, the sharpest decline in presidential history. To make matters worse for the president, inflation was through the roof. The Dow Jones had fallen almost 45% from the fall of 1973 to the fall of 74. In order to provide an escape route, Ford would propose a tax increase that was publicly criticized by then California Governor Ronald Reagan. As Ford pressed on, quite weathered, to say the least, a movement began to build as the election year of 1976 approached. Because Vice President Nelson Rockefeller had announced almost a year earlier that he did not wish to continue serving as Vice President beyond January of 1977, Ford tapped Senator Bob Dole of Kansas to be his running mate. Interestingly enough, Rockefeller died in January of 1979, almost 2 years to the date after officially departing the Ford administration. Lacking confidence in Ford, after all, he was not voted in by the public, many Republicans viewed the '76 election as one without an incumbent. This meant that looking elsewhere within the party for a new candidate was more than just a passing consideration. By late 1975, President Ford's approval rating had dipped into the low to mid 30% range nationally. And on November 20th of that year, two-term California Governor Ronald Reagan would enter the presidential race, and with it, he would bring a strong new conservative movement and message. By early 1976, Reagan would take his message to the public as the primaries heated up.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ronald Reagan.
Good evening to all of you from California. Tonight, I'd like to talk to you about issues which I think are involved or should be involved in this primary election season. I'm a candidate for the Republican nomination for president, but I hope that you, who are independents and Democrats, will let me talk to you also tonight, because the problems facing our country are problems that just don't bear any party label. In this election season, the White House is telling us a solid economic recovery is taking place. It claims a slight drop in unemployment. It says that prices aren't going up as fast, but they are still going up, and that the stock market has shown some gains. But in fact, things seem just about as they were back in the 1972 election year. Remember, we were also coming out of a recession then. Inflation had been running at around 6%, unemployment about 7%. Remember, too, the upsurge and the optimism lasted through the election year and into 1973. And then the roof fell in. Once again, we had unemployment, only this time not 7%, more than 10%. And inflation wasn't 6%, it was 12%.
When the primary elections concluded in June of '76, the number of pledged delegates were as follows: 824 for President Ford and 678 for Ronald Reagan, with a magic number of 1,130 in order to clinch the nomination. A piece of history was made. The primaries had concluded without a definitive winner, no nominee for the Republican ticket, and no one to face former Georgia Governor Jimmy Carter, who secured the nomination at the Democratic National Convention just 1 month earlier. A contested convention in August of 1976, an event that hasn't occurred since. Entering Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri, home to the 1976 National Convention, Ronald Reagan was confident that he had enough in the tank to win the nomination.
We're ahead to the extent that recently, for the first time, I said I believed that there was a very great possibility, if not probability, that I could go to the convention with enough delegates in advance to win on the first ballot.
Uncommitted delegates would be the core focus at the convention, with both the Ford and Reagan camps doing everything possible to persuade the undecided. It was estimated that roughly 100 delegates on average were uncommitted when the convention began, the largest groups coming from the states of Mississippi and Illinois. How did it all unfold? Well, what actually occurred would be something for the history books, and also a life lesson, proof that sometimes you need to lose in order to win.
After winning some of those primaries, none of us ever thought that was out of our reach. Something would happen that would turn that convention. And I think Reagan believed that.
Madam Chairman, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, home of the Phillies and the Pirates, cast 10 votes for Governor Reagan and 93 votes for Gerald Ford. 20 votes for Gerald R. Ford.
Ford had given his acceptance speech, and he then turned to the skybox where we were, where my father was, and sort of beckoned my father to come down. I think he was conscious of the fact that nearly 50% of the people in the hall, maybe even more, really would have preferred Ronald Reagan to be the candidate.
And we stood, and he kept doing this to them to tell them to sit down. They never would sit down. They wouldn't stop yelling for him, and speech. I just hoped that Ronnie had something that he wanted to say, because he said to me, as we were running, we didn't expect to be up on the stage. And as we were running to get there, he said, I haven't the foggiest idea what I'm going to say.
If I could just take a moment and I had an assignment the other day. Someone asked me to write a letter for a time capsule that is going to be opened in Los Angeles 100 years from now. We live in a world in which the great powers have poised and aimed at each other horrible missiles of destruction, nuclear weapons that can in a matter of minutes arrive in each other's country and destroy virtually the civilized world we live in. And suddenly it dawned on me, those who would read this letter 100 years from now will know whether those missiles were fired. They will know whether we met our challenge. whether they have the freedoms that we have known up until now will depend on what we do here. Mr. President.
And the power of that speech was extraordinary, and you can just feel throughout the auditorium the palpable sense among the delegates that we've nominated the wrong guy.
On the plane going back, I went over and I had a convention ticket, and I asked him if he'd sign it as a souvenir. And what he wrote was, "We fought, we dreamed, and the dream is still with us." And looking back on it now, he never gave up. He just kept right on going. It was, you know, this incredible crushing defeat, and it didn't crush him. Just came back up, shook his head, and said, "Okay, what's next?" And that began the campaign for the year 1980.
The final delegate breakdown went something like this: 1,187 for Gerald Ford, 1,070 for Ronald Reagan. And oh, by the way, did Republican delegates really pick the wrong guy in Gerald Ford? In November of 1976, President Gerald Ford and Bob Dole would go against the ticket of Jimmy Carter and former Minnesota Senator Walter Mondale. Carter received 297 votes in the Electoral College to Ford's 240, surpassing the required 270 to win the White House. Carter was propelled to victory by taking all of the Deep South, Texas, and the Carolinas. The election of 1976 would mark the final time that the Democratic Party would have a strong hold on these states for many, many years. A new wave of conservatism was about to dominate the South and the country. Momentum was building, a movement was underway, and as the 1970s slowly melted away, America was longing for a change. In November of 1979, a familiar face returned.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ronald Reagan.
Good evening. I'm here tonight to announce my intention to seek the Republican nomination for President of the United States.
As Reagan slowly became the face of the Republican Party, the choice was clear. On May 26, 1980, Ronald Reagan officially secured the Republican nomination for President of the United States. Reagan was now the future of the party, and on a hot July night, Reagan formally accepted the nomination for the nation's highest office at the Republican National Convention in Detroit, Michigan. During the convention, Reagan would tap former CIA director and former 1980 presidential hopeful George H.W. Bush of Texas to be his running mate. With Bush appealing to more moderate Republican voters, it appeared to be the ideal ticket for the changing times. This time it was real. Reagan wouldn't speak after the winner accepted the honor. Reagan was the winner, and he was making a full-court press to the White House.
I might also add that there are decisions that are made in the Oval Office by every president which are profound in nature. There are always trouble spots in the world, and how those troubled areas are addressed by a president alone in that Oval Office affects our nation directly.
The more Jimmy Carter began to stumble in the eyes of the public during the latter portion of 1980, the more it became obvious that Reagan didn't just have the Republican Party on his side, but most of the country as well. During the fall of 1980, television commercials for Reagan posed one important question: can we afford 4 more years of this? This commercial aired just 1 month prior to the election.
The League of Women Voters invited President Carter to join the 1980 debates. He refused the invitation. Maybe it's because during his administration, inflation has gone as high as 18%. The number of Americans out of work has reached 8.5 million. Housing starts have hit a new low, while interest rates have hit a new high. Maybe he won't debate because he knows the real question is, can we afford 4 more years of this?
The time is now for Reagan. Reagan for president.
If the 1976 Republican National Convention marked the rise of Ronald Reagan on the national stage, election night 1980 would mark the triumph of new patriotism realized. By 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time, NBC News would officially call the race, something completely unheard of in today's political world. Ronald Reagan would defeat incumbent Jimmy Carter by almost 10 percentage points, making it the largest margin of defeat by a sitting president since Herbert Hoover fell to Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932. Riding high on the mighty coattails of Reagan, Republicans were also able to take control of the Senate on election night in 1980. It was the first time the party could make that claim since 1953 through 1955.
Let me just say, first of all, this has been, well, there's never been a more humbling moment in my life. I would have been not only humbled by the extent of what has happened tonight, even if it had been the cliffhanger that all of us, I think, were expecting, it would have been the same way, but just to have had the support of the people of this country. I consider the trust that you have placed in me sacred, and I give you my sacred oath that I will do my utmost to justify your faith. Earlier this evening, I spoke on the phone with President Carter. He called, John Addison called, but the President pledged the utmost in cooperation in the transition that will take place in these coming months. I offered him my own cooperation.
As for the numbers, the map speaks for itself. The country was Reagan, and Reagan was the country. Claiming over 50% of the popular vote in a four-man race, the president-elect took home 489 Electoral College votes. Carter garnered a mere 49. What began with the fall of Richard Nixon and the uncertainty of Gerald Ford ultimately culminated with the inauguration of Ronald Reagan and a renewed sense of hope in America.
Governor, are you prepared to take the constitutional oath?
I am.
If you place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right hand and repeat after me, I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend.
Preserve, protect, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
May I congratulate you, sir.
Many political pundits, not long after the election, began to point to the Reagan Revolution as being fueled in large measure by Reagan Democrats. This phrase was coined to define Democrats who voted for Reagan, in which time a change in the fabric of the United States was taking place. Millions of voters from across party lines chose Reagan in 1980 because they felt he appealed to them on a personal level. Reagan Democrats were largely white folks from the South and blue-collar workers from the North. This faction of the population was high on Reagan. They credited him with looking out for the middle class, having a strong economic policy, and being tough when it came to national security. The working men and working women, the folks who make the wheels turn, they were the Reagan voters, and many of which were Democrats. This is why Reagan was able to achieve a massive victory over Jimmy Carter in such a landslide fashion. You don't win over the whole nation if only your party is carrying you. Ronald Reagan won the hearts and minds of the people. This relationship would propel him through the 1980s, a relationship that began in large measure on that fateful night at the Republican National Convention in 1976. As for the 1984 presidential election, the Reagan wave was at an all-time high. Going head-to-head against Walter Mondale, the former Minnesota senator and Jimmy Carter's vice president, a Reagan victory appeared to be a guarantee. During the election season, the only major news out of the Mondale camp was that he had selected U.S. House Representative Geraldine Ferraro of New York to be his running mate. marking the first time in history that a woman would be featured on a major party's ticket. As for memorable moments from '84, here are two. Let's begin with classic debate footage and one of the funniest and most timeless moments in debate history. Ronald Reagan, his age, and Walter Mondale's youth.
Mr. Truitt, your question to President Reagan.
Mr. President, I want to raise an issue that I think has been lurking out there for 2 or 3 weeks and cast it specifically in national security terms. You already are the oldest president in history, and some of your staff say you were tired after your most recent encounter with Mr. Mondale. I recall yet that President Kennedy had to go for days on end with very little sleep during the Cuba Missile Crisis. Is there any doubt in your mind that you would be able to function in such circumstances?
Not at all, Mr. Truitt, and I want you to know that also I will not make age an issue of this campaign. I am not going to exploit for political purposes my opponent's youth and inexperience. If I still have time, I might add, Mr. Truitt, I might add that it was Seneca or it was Cicero, I don't know which, that said, if it was not for the elders correcting the mistakes of the young, there would be no state.
Mr. President, I'd like to head for the fence and try to catch that one before it goes over, but I'll go on to another question.
The next clip is a classic commercial with a phrase that has endured for decades. It's morning again in America. Thanks to Reagan's first-term success and this crafty media campaign, this Reagan ad from 1984 is arguably the most revered presidential commercial in history.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
As for the election itself, November 6, 1984 would once again find Reagan making history. It was election night, and the president was about to pull off what today would seem unthinkable, if not downright impossible. President Reagan captured 58.8% of the popular vote and won the Electoral College by a final total of 525 to 13. Reagan captured 49 states, while Mondale claimed his home state of Minnesota and the District of Columbia. Reagan's staggering 525 Electoral College votes are the most votes of any presidential candidate in history. The president also received 55% of the vote from women, despite Geraldine Ferraro being on the ticket for the Democratic Party. As for Mondale, his 13 votes in the Electoral College marked the lowest total for a Democrat since 1860, a record that still stands and probably will forever. While Mondale struck out with unlucky 13, all Reagan supporters could chant that night was 4, as in 4 more years. In his usual form, Reagan had a clever response to the audience at his acceptance party.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you. I think that's just been arranged.
Ronald Reagan's election domination was complete. The president earned a whopping 1,014 votes in the Electoral College over 2 campaigns. Carter and Mondale combined, they earned just 62. By November of 1988, the Reagan era was winding to a close. Election night 88 saw Reagan's vice president, George H.W. Bush, defeat Massachusetts Governor Michael Dukakis in a landslide of his own. The Reagan administration officially came to an end on January 20th, 1989, leaving its mark on a decade and transforming politics in the United States, in many ways, forever. A new conservatism was born, and with it, its values that continue to endure to this day. However, before the president left office, he had a final word for the people, those who turned America back from the brink. The people who helped to bolster his political trajectory at the 1976 National Convention and later through his leadership as president, helped Reagan to convert the United States into that shining city on a hill, the one Reagan, in his very own words, had envisioned his entire political life.
The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we'd call a little wooden boat. And like the other pilgrims, he was looking for a home that would be free. I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. That's how I saw it and see it still. And how stands the city on this winter night? More prosperous, more secure, and happier than it was 8 years ago. But more than that, after 200 years, 2 centuries, she still stands strong and true on the granite ridge, and her glow is held steady no matter what storm. And she's still a beacon, still a magnet for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. We've done our part, and as I walk off into the city streets, a final word to the men and women of the Reagan Revolution, the men and women across America who for 8 years did the work that brought America back. My friends, we did it. We weren't just marking time, we made a difference. We made the city stronger, we made the city freer, and we left her in good hands. All in all, not bad. Not bad at all. And so, goodbye, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.